A millionaire disguises himself as a garbage man to test his son's fiancée, and what she says to him leaves him stunned. In the luxurious Anderson mansion, Richard, a discreet 60-year-old multimillionaire, pensively observed the family portrait adorning the wall of his study. His eyes lingered on the image of his only son, Michael, a handsome 28-year-old who had inherited his elegant bearing and penetrating gaze. Richard sighed deeply as he poured himself a glass of his favorite whiskey. It had been just a week since Michael had given him the news. He was getting married. The bride-to-be, a certain Brittany Taylor, was a well-known 25-year-old model and influencer who had captured his son's heart after a whirlwind romance. "Dad, I want you to meet her," Michael had said, his eyes shining with excitement. "I'm sure you'll love her." Richard did not share his son's enthusiasm. Throughout his life, he had learned to judge people beyond appearances, and something about Michael's description of Brittany didn't quite convince him. Was she really the right woman for his son, or was she just another gold digger attracted by the Anderson name and family fortune? Determined to uncover the truth, Richard devised a risky but effective plan. He would meet Brittany before the official introduction, but not as the powerful businessman he was. Instead, he would pose as a simple worker. Only then could he see the true face of his son's future wife. With the help of his loyal butler, Richard procured a uniform from the municipal cleaning company. He grew an unkempt beard and dyed his graying hair a dull gray. Standing in front of the mirror, he barely recognized himself. The elegant millionaire had disappeared, replaced by an ordinary, tired-looking man with a humble appearance. The next step was to arrange a casual encounter with Brittany. Richard knew from the young woman's social media that she frequently visited an exclusive restaurant in the city center. With one phone call to his contacts, he ensured that Brittany had a reservation for the following day. That night, as he dined alone in the mansion's dining room, Richard couldn't stop thinking about his plan. Was he doing the right thing? Wouldn't it be better to trust his son's judgment? But deep in his heart, he knew he needed to do this not just for Michael, but for the Anderson legacy. On the other side of the city, in a luxurious penthouse overlooking the ocean, Brittany Taylor was preparing for bed in front of her vanity mirror. She meticulously applied her night creams while mentally reviewing her schedule for the next day. A photo shoot in the morning, lunch at her favorite restaurant, and then an afternoon of shopping. Life was smiling at her. Her eyes fell on the dazzling engagement ring adorning her finger, and a smile of satisfaction crossed her lips. Soon she would be Mrs. Anderson, and all her dreams of wealth and fame would come true. Michael was handsome and kind, yes, but what had really won her over was the Anderson business empire. "Tomorrow will be a great day," Brittany murmured as she slipped into bed. She had no idea how true those words would be, nor how a simple lunch would change the course of her life forever. The next morning, Richard woke up with a mixture of nerves and determination. He carefully dressed in the garbage man's uniform and looked at himself one last time in the mirror. The man staring back at him was unrecognizable, messy hair, unkempt beard, and a tired expression on his face. "Good luck, sir," his butler said as he opened the back door of the mansion. Richard nodded silently and climbed into an old car he had rented for the occasion. The luxurious Bentley he usually drove would have completely clashed with his new image. As he drove to the city center, Richard mentally reviewed the plan. He would enter the restaurant just as Brittany was having lunch, pretending to be looking for work. His goal was to interact with her enough to judge her true character. At 1:30 p.m. sharp, Richard parked in front of Le Petit Chateau restaurant. Through the elegant windows, he could see Brittany sitting at a table by the window. She was wearing a designer dress and large sunglasses, despite being indoors. With his heart pounding, Richard entered the restaurant. The maitre d' looked at him disdainfully, but before he could throw him out, Richard spoke in a hoarse voice. "Excuse me, sir. I'm looking for work. Could I speak to the manager?" The maitre d' frowned, visibly annoyed by the interruption. "Sir, this is a luxury establishment. We don't offer jobs to people off the street. I must ask you to leave immediately." Richard noticed that Brittany had looked up from her phone and was watching them curiously. "It was time to act. Please, sir," he insisted with a broken voice. I just need an opportunity. I'll do any job." The maitre d' was about to call security when Brittany intervened. "What's going on here?" she asked in an authoritative voice. The maitre d' turned to her, visibly uncomfortable. "Nothing to worry about, Miss Taylor. This gentleman was just leaving." Brittany looked Richard up and down with a mixture of curiosity and disgust on her face. "Is it true that you're looking for work?" she asked directly. Keeping his head down, Richard replied, "Yes, miss, I've been unemployed for months, and I have a family to feed." For a moment it seemed that a hint of compassion crossed Brittany's face, but it was only for an instant. Her expression hardened, and a mocking smile appeared on her lips. "And you think a place like this would hire someone like you?" she said scornfully. "Look at yourself. Your appearance is deplorable. Don't you know that image is everything in this world?" Richard felt as if he had been slapped. Although he knew he was playing a role, Brittany's words hurt him deeply. I just want to work honestly," he mumbled. Brittany let out a cold laugh. "Honesty? What an outdated concept. Listen, my good man, I'll give you some advice. Instead of bothering decent people in luxury restaurants, why don't you look for something more suited to your level? I'm sure they always need people to pick up trash on the streets." The maitre d' and some nearby diners laughed at Brittany's cruel comment. Richard felt his blood boil. How could his son be in love with such a despicable woman? "Thank you for your advice, miss," Richard said with dignity. "Have a good day." Without another word, he left the restaurant. Once on the street, he took a deep breath, trying to calm down. The plan had worked better than expected, but the result was devastating. Brittany Taylor had shown her true face, and it was much worse than Richard had imagined. As he drove back to the mansion, Richard couldn't stop thinking about how he would tell Michael what he had discovered. Would he believe him, or would he think he was interfering with his happiness? What Richard didn't know was that fate had an even bigger surprise in store. The encounter at the restaurant was just the beginning of a series of events that would test not only Michael and Brittany's love, but also the values and principles of the entire Anderson family. The days following the encounter at the restaurant were an emotional roller coaster for Richard. On one hand, he was determined to protect his son from a woman who clearly didn't deserve him. On the other, he feared that revealing the truth might push Michael away forever. Meanwhile, oblivious to the impending storm, Michael and Brittany continued with their wedding plans. The young Anderson was more in love than ever, blinded by Brittany's beauty and apparent charm. One afternoon, while Michael was working at the office, Brittany decided to make a surprise visit to the Anderson mansion. She wanted to start familiarizing herself with what would soon be her new home and, incidentally, win over the service staff. Upon arriving at the imposing property, Brittany was greeted by the butler, who led her to the main living room. The young woman couldn't help but marvel at the luxury surrounding her: original works of art, period furniture, crystal chandeliers. Everything screamed wealth and power. "Can I offer you something to drink, Miss Taylor?" the butler asked politely. Brittany smiled with feigned modesty. "Oh, please, call me Brittany. I'll soon be part of the family. And yes, I'd love an iced tea if it's not too much trouble." The butler nodded and withdrew, leaving Brittany alone in the living room. The young woman began to wander around the room, admiring every detail and mentally calculating the value of each object she saw. Her eyes sparkled with barely concealed greed. At that moment, Richard entered the living room. Surprised by the unexpected visit, Brittany turned at the sound of his footsteps, and for an instant, a flash of recognition crossed her face. But it was so brief that Richard thought he had imagined it. "Mr. Anderson," said Brittany with a dazzling smile, "it's a pleasure to finally meet you." Richard remained neutral as he shook the young woman's hand. "The pleasure is mine, Brittany. Michael has told me a lot about you." "I hope only good things," Brittany laughed, batting her eyelashes coquettishly. "Of course," Richard replied, studying every gesture of the young woman. "My son is completely in love with you." Brittany smiled with satisfaction. "And I with him. Mr. Anderson. Michael is the man of my dreams." Richard decided to test Brittany. In a casual tone, he commented, "You know, Brittany, I've always believed that a person's character is revealed in how they treat those who can do nothing for them. The less fortunate, for example." For a moment, Brittany's smile faltered. "Oh, of course," she said, regaining her composure. Could you tell me more about that? Brittany seemed to hesitate for an instant, but then began to talk enthusiastically about supposed charitable activities in which she participated. Richard listened attentively, noting the inconsistencies in her story and the lack of concrete details. As Brittany spoke, Richard couldn't help but remember the cruelty with which she had treated the garbage man at the restaurant. The discrepancy between her words and her actions was abysmal. Suddenly, the butler entered the living room with the iced tea for Brittany. Upon seeing him, the young woman interrupted her discourse on charity and adopted a condescending tone. "Ah, finally, I thought I'd have to go to the kitchen myself to fetch it." The butler, impassive, served the drink without comment. Richard observed the scene with barely disguised disgust. "Brittany," Richard said once the butler had withdrawn, "what do you think about honest work? Do you believe all professions deserve respect?" The question seemed to disconcert Brittany. "Well, I suppose so," she responded with some discomfort. "Although, of course, there are more dignified jobs than others, don't you think?" Richard felt his patience wearing thin. He was about to confront Brittany when the sound of the front door opening interrupted them. It was Michael, who had decided to return home early. "Dad, Brittany!" Michael exclaimed upon entering the living room, visibly surprised and pleased to find them together. "What a wonderful surprise! Are you getting to know each other?" Brittany gracefully stood up and ran to embrace Michael. "My love, I wanted to surprise your father. We were having a fascinating conversation about work and charity." "I'm delighted," Michael said, beaming. "I knew you'd adore her, Dad," he added, turning to Richard. Richard forced a smile, feeling the weight of the truth like a slab on his shoulders. "Certainly, Brittany is unique," he said, carefully choosing his words. Michael, oblivious to the tension in the air, proposed having dinner together that night. "What do you say if we all go out? We could try that new Italian place downtown." "I'd love to, darling," Brittany responded enthusiastically. "But first I must go home to change. I can't go to such an elegant place in these clothes." Richard observed the expensive designer dress Brittany was wearing and had to suppress a sarcastic comment. Instead, he said, "Of course, image is very important, right, Brittany?" The young woman caught the tone but maintained her perfect smile. "That's right, Mr. Anderson. As my grandmother used to say, dress for the job you want, not for the job you have." "Interesting philosophy," Richard murmured. "I wonder what your grandmother would think of those who can't afford to dress in designer clothes." An uncomfortable silence settled in the room. Michael, sensing the tension, quickly intervened. "Well then, shall we meet at the restaurant at 8? Does that work for you, Dad?" Richard nodded, grateful for the interruption. Brittany said goodbye with a kiss on Michael's cheek and a polite gesture towards Richard. When the door closed behind her, Michael turned to his father with a worried expression. "Dad, is everything okay? You seem a bit distant with Brittany." Richard sighed deeply. Should he tell his son what he had discovered, or was it better to wait and give Brittany another chance? "Son," he began, carefully choosing his words, "are you sure you really know Brittany? That you share her values and her vision of life?" Michael frowned, confused. "Of course, Dad, Brittany is wonderful. She's kind, intelligent, fun. Why do you ask?" Richard decided it wasn't yet time to reveal the whole truth. "I just want to make sure you're happy, son. Marriage is a very important step." "I know, Dad," Michael replied with a smile, "and I appreciate your concern, but I assure you that Brittany is the perfect woman for me." As Michael went upstairs to change for dinner, Richard remained in the living room, lost in his thoughts. How could he open his son's eyes without seeming like a controlling and distrustful father? The dinner at the Italian restaurant was a test of patience for Richard. He observed how Brittany deployed all her charm, laughing at Michael's jokes and making intelligent comments about art and culture. But he also noticed how she treated the restaurant staff with barely disguised disdain, how her eyes lit up when talking about luxuries, and how she diverted the conversation every time Richard tried to talk about deeper topics. As the night progressed, Richard became even more convinced that he needed to act. He couldn't allow his son to make the mistake of marrying a woman who was only interested in his money and social position. As they returned home in Michael's car, with Brittany chattering about wedding details, Richard made a decision. He would organize a charity event at the Anderson mansion, supposedly to raise funds for a noble cause. It would be the perfect opportunity to test Brittany once again, and perhaps for Michael to see her true nature. What Richard didn't know was that Brittany was also plotting her own plans. The young woman had recognized the garbage man from the restaurant in Richard, and although she didn't understand why the millionaire had disguised himself, she knew she had to act cautiously. She couldn't allow anything to come between her and the Anderson fortune. That night, while Michael slept peacefully, Brittany lay awake, devising strategies to definitively win over Richard and secure her place in the Anderson family. What none of the three knew was that fate had some surprises in store that would test not only their relationships, but also their deepest values. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Richard had announced his intention to organize a grand charity gala at the Anderson mansion, supposedly to raise funds for a new community center in an underprivileged neighborhood of the city. In reality, the event was an elaborate test designed to reveal Brittany's true nature. Michael, excited by his father's initiative, immersed himself fully in the organization. Brittany, for her part, saw the event as a perfect opportunity to shine and consolidate her position in high society. The night of the gala arrived. The Anderson mansion sparkled, decorated with elegant floral arrangements and dim lights. The guests, the cream of society, began to arrive dressed in their finest attire. Brittany made her entrance on Michael's arm, wearing a spectacular designer dress that left everyone speechless. Her dazzling smile and elegant bearing instantly made her the center of attention. Richard, dressed in an impeccable tuxedo, observed the scene with a mixture of anticipation and concern. He knew that this night would be crucial for his family's future. As the guests enjoyed the initial cocktail, Richard approached Brittany and Michael. "You look lovely, dear," he said with a calculated smile. "What do you say if you help me receive some of the special guests?" Brittany nodded enthusiastically. "Of course, Mr. Anderson, it would be my pleasure." Richard guided Brittany towards a group of people who had just arrived. To the young woman's surprise, they weren't the millionaires and celebrities she expected, but a group of humble people dressed in simple clothes and visibly uncomfortable in the luxurious environment. "Brittany, let me introduce you to the true guests of honor tonight," Richard said. "They are the representatives of the neighborhood where we will build the community center." Brittany's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, how interesting," she said, trying to hide her dismay. Richard closely observed how Brittany interacted with the guests. He noticed how her body language changed, how her smile became forced, and how she tried to cut the conversations as short as possible. Throughout the night, Richard continued introducing Brittany to various groups of people: volunteers from charitable organizations, social workers, even some of the mansion's maintenance staff, whom he had specially invited for the occasion. Michael, busy attending to other guests, didn't notice his fiancée's growing discomfort, but Richard didn't miss a detail. He saw how Brittany, when she thought no one was watching, discreetly wiped her hand with a handkerchief after greeting a worker. He noticed how she avoided the areas where the less wealthy guests congregated, preferring the company of the few celebrities who had attended. Halfway through the evening, Richard decided to deliver the final blow. He climbed onto the small stage they had set up in the main hall and asked for everyone's attention. "Dear friends," he began, "I want to thank you all for being here tonight. As you know, the objective of this gala is to raise funds for a new community center. But it's also an opportunity to remember that we are all part of the same community, regardless of our social or economic position." He paused and looked directly at Brittany, who was standing next to Michael in the front row. "That's why," he continued, "I've decided that half of the funds raised tonight will be allocated to a scholarship program for underprivileged youth. And to demonstrate our commitment, I propose that each of us spend a day volunteering in the neighborhood where the center will be built." A murmur of surprise and approval ran through the room. Michael smiled, proud of his father. Brittany, on the other hand, had visibly paled. "Brittany, dear," Richard said, addressing her directly, "as a future member of the Anderson family, would you like to be the first to commit to this initiative?" All eyes turned to Brittany. The young woman found herself trapped. Rejecting the proposal would make her look selfish and superficial. Accepting it meant subjecting herself to an experience she considered degrading. Of course," she finally said with a forced smile. "It will be an honor to participate in such a noble cause." Michael hugged her, moved by her apparent generosity. But Richard could see the panic in Brittany's eyes. The trap had closed as the gala continued. Brittany excused herself to go to the bathroom. Once alone, she looked at herself in the mirror, trying to regain her composure. She couldn't believe what had just happened. How was she going to get out of this situation without ruining her image? What Brittany didn't know was that her reaction hadn't gone unnoticed by another person. Sarah, the Anderson Mansion's head of staff, had observed the entire scene with interest. The woman, who had been working for the family for decades, had her own suspicions about Michael's fiancée's true intentions. Meanwhile, Richard discreetly met with the family lawyer, who had also been invited to the gala. "Is everything ready?" Richard asked in a low voice. The lawyer nodded. "All the documents are prepared, Mr. Anderson. We can proceed whenever you consider it appropriate." Richard sighed, feeling the weight of the decision he was about to make. He knew that what he was going to do could forever change his son's life, but he was convinced it was the right thing to do. "Very well," he finally said. "Tomorrow we'll set the final phase of the plan in motion." What none of those present could imagine was that fate had a surprise in store that would change the course of events in a way no one could foresee. A revelation that would shake the foundations of the Anderson family and test the love, loyalty, and values of all involved. The morning after the charity gala dawned, grey and rainy, as if the weather reflected the emotional storm that was brewing in the Anderson mansion. Richard woke up early with a mixture of determination and apprehension. He knew that the actions he was about to take would change the course of his son's life, but he was convinced it was necessary. As he had breakfast in his study, reviewing the documents his lawyer had prepared, a knock on the door startled him. It was Sarah, the head of staff, with an expression of urgency on her face. "Mr. Anderson, excuse the interruption, but there's something you need to know," Sarah said, closing the door behind her. Intrigued, Richard invited her to sit down. Sarah, visibly nervous, began to speak. "Last night during the gala, I overheard a conversation between Miss Brittany and a man I didn't recognize. They were in the garden. They thought no one could hear them." Sarah proceeded to relate what she had heard. Brittany was involved in an elaborate plan to con the Anderson family. The man she was talking to was her real boyfriend, a professional scammer who posed as a fashion photographer. Together, they had planned the chance encounter with Michael months ago, with the aim of accessing the Anderson fortune. Richard listened with a mixture of horror and, paradoxically, relief. His suspicions had been correct, but the truth was even worse than he had imagined. "Are you sure of what you heard, Sarah?" Richard asked, still processing the information. Sarah nodded firmly. "Completely sure, sir. I even heard them talk about how they planned to get rid of you and Michael once they had access to the company." "Accounts." Richard stood up from his chair, his mind working at full speed. He needed to act quickly but cautiously. He couldn't allow Brittany to suspect that they had discovered her plan. "Sarah, thank you for your loyalty. I need you to keep this absolutely secret for now, and I need your help for what I'm about to do." Meanwhile, in her luxury apartment, Brittany was preparing for another day of pretending to be the perfect fiancée. The previous night had been a disaster from her point of view. Richard's proposal to work as a volunteer threatened to expose her facade of being a charitable woman. As she applied her makeup, her phone rang. It was Jake, her real boyfriend and accomplice. "How's everything going, sweetheart?" Jake asked in a honeyed voice. "Any problems with old man Anderson?" Brittany sighed, frustrated. "The old man is smarter than we thought last night. He organized a charity gala and put me in a compromising situation. I had to commit to doing volunteer work. Can you believe it?" Jake let out a laugh. "Come on, Britt, it's not that bad. You just have to hold on a little longer. Soon we'll have access to the entire Anderson fortune, and we can disappear." I know, Brittany replied, biting her lip. "But there's something in Richard's gaze that worries me. It's as if he suspected something." "Don't be paranoid," Jake reassured her. "You've done a perfect job so far. Michael is eating out of your hand." After hanging up, Brittany looked at herself in the mirror, rehearsing her best smile. She couldn't afford any mistakes, not when she was so close to achieving everything she had always dreamed of. Meanwhile, at the Anderson mansion, Richard set his plan in motion with the help of Sarah and his private security team. He began gathering evidence of Brittany and Jake's illicit activities. He hired a private investigator to follow Jake and document his movements. Michael, oblivious to everything happening around him, continued on a cloud of happiness. That morning, he decided to surprise Brittany with breakfast in bed. He arrived at his fiancée's apartment with a tray full of her favorite delicacies. "Surprise, my love," he exclaimed as he entered the bedroom. Brittany, startled, quickly hid her phone under her pillow. "Michael, darling, what a beautiful gesture," she said quickly, composing her best smile. As they had breakfast together, Michael couldn't help but notice some tension in Brittany. "Is everything okay, love? You seem a bit distracted." Brittany hurried to reassure him. "Oh, it's nothing. I'm just a little nervous about the volunteer work your father proposed." "You know, I'm not used to that kind of environment." Michael took her hand tenderly. "Don't worry, I'll be with you every step of the way. I'm so proud of you for accepting to do this. It shows how generous and compassionate you are." Michael's words stabbed Brittany's conscience like daggers. For a moment, she felt a pang of guilt for what she was doing, but she quickly pushed those thoughts away. It was too late to turn back. That afternoon, Richard called an urgent meeting in his office. His lawyer, the head of security, and Sarah attended. He presented them with the evidence they had gathered about Brittany and Jake, including recordings of their phone conversations and records of suspicious bank transactions. "Gentlemen," Richard said in a grave voice, "what we're about to do won't be easy. My son will suffer, but it's necessary to protect him and protect our family's legacy." The lawyer nodded. "All the documents are ready, Mr. Anderson. We can proceed when you give the order." Richard looked out the window, watching as the sun began to set. "Tomorrow," he finally said, "we'll do it tomorrow." What none of them knew was that fate had one more surprise in store. That same night, as Brittany prepared for dinner with Michael, she received an unexpected call. It was a voice from the past, someone she thought she had left behind long ago. "Brittany, it's me, Kevin, your brother." The color drained from Brittany's face. Her brother, whom she hadn't seen in years, the only member of her family who knew her true past, had returned, and with him threatened to crumble the entire elaborate castle of lies she had built. "Kevin," Brittany whispered, her voice trembling. What do you want?" "I need to see you," Kevin replied. "It's important. It's about Mom." Brittany felt the world crumbling around her. Her past and her present were about to collide in the most catastrophic way possible, and in the middle of it all was Michael, the man who, much to her chagrin, had begun to awaken real feelings in her. As she hung up the phone, Brittany realized she was at a crossroads. The decisions she would make in the next 24 hours would determine not only her future, but that of everyone around her. What none of those involved could imagine was that the events of the following day would change their lives in ways none of them could foresee. Long-held secrets would come to light, loyalties would be tested, and the true meaning of love and family would be questioned in the most painful way possible. The morning dawned with a deceptive calm over the city. At the Anderson mansion, Richard woke up early, his mind reviewing every detail of the plan he was about to set in motion. He knew the consequences of his actions would be painful, especially for Michael, but he was convinced it was the only way to protect his son and his legacy. Meanwhile, in her apartment, Brittany was going through her own internal crisis. Her brother Kevin's call had left her, sleepless all night. What should she do? Face her past or continue with her plan? For the first time since she had started this deception, Brittany felt she was losing control of the situation. Michael, oblivious to the storms that were brewing, was preparing for what he believed would be a special day. He had planned a surprise for Brittany. They were going to visit the neighborhood where the community center would be built together. He wanted her to see firsthand the impact their generosity would have on the lives of the less fortunate. Mid-morning, the three met at the Anderson mansion. Richard, maintaining a facade of normalcy, greeted them cordially. "Michael, Brittany, good to see you," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ready for the big day? Brittany, visibly nervous, nodded without saying a word. Michael, enthusiastic, began to talk about their plans for the day. Dad, we've decided to visit the neighborhood where the center will be built. I want Brittany to see the impact our project will have. Richard exchanged a significant look with Sarah, who was standing discreetly in a corner. It was time to set the plan in motion. Before you go, Richard said, there's something important we need to discuss. Why don't we go to my office? Once in the office, Richard locked the door. Brittany felt her heart racing. Had they discovered her? Michael, Brittany, Richard began in a grave voice. What I'm about to tell you will change our lives forever. At that moment, Brittany's phone began to ring insistently. It was Kevin with trembling hands. Brittany rejected the call. Richard continued, I've discovered something about you, Brittany. Something that I'm afraid will put an end to this relationship and your plans to marry my son. Michael, confused and alarmed, looked alternately at his father and his fiancée. What are you talking about, Dad? What plans? Richard pulled a folder from his desk and opened it, revealing photographs of Brittany with Jake, bank records and transcripts of phone conversations. Brittany is not who she says she is, son. She and her accomplice Jake have been planning to con us from the beginning. It's all been a lie. Brittany, seeing her world crumble, tried to defend herself. No, Michael, don't listen to him. I love you. This is all a misunderstanding. But Michael, looking at the evidence with growing horror, felt his heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. Is this true, Brittany? Has it all been a lie? Before Brittany could respond, the office door burst open. It was Kevin, Brittany's brother, who had managed to enter the mansion following his sister, Brittany. Kevin shouted out of breath, You have to come with me now. Mom is dying. Chaos broke out in the room. Michael, confused and hurt, looked at Brittany without recognizing her. Richard, surprised by the intrusion, was calling security, and Brittany, trapped between her past and her present, felt the world spinning around her. In the midst of the tumult, Brittany made a decision. With tears in her eyes, she looked at Michael. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never meant for things to go this far. And with those words, she ran out of the room, closely followed by Kevin. Michael, devastated, collapsed into a chair. Richard, seeing the pain in his son's eyes, approached to console him. I'm sorry, son, I know it hurts, but it was necessary for you to know the truth. Meanwhile, Brittany and Kevin ran through the city streets, heading to the hospital where their mother was fighting for her life. On the way, Brittany felt the weight of her lies and deceptions crushing her. Kevin, she said between tears, I've ruined everything. I've hurt innocent people. How could I let things go so far? Kevin, without stopping running, replied, It's never too late to do the right thing. Britt, Mom always said that true character is revealed in the most difficult moments. Those words resonated in Brittany's mind as they entered the hospital. Would she be capable of redeeming herself? Could she ever repair the damage she had caused? Meanwhile, at the Anderson mansion, Michael struggled to assimilate everything he had discovered. His world had shattered in a matter of minutes, but amid his pain, a question persisted. Had the moments he had shared with Brittany been real, or had it all been part of a masterful performance? Richard, seeing the torment in his son's eyes, realized that perhaps his plan had had deeper consequences than he had foreseen. Had he done the right thing by exposing the truth in this way, or had he underestimated the power of the feelings that had arisen between Michael and Brittany? As the day progressed, all those involved found themselves at a crossroads. The decisions they would make in the coming hours would not only define their own destinies, but would also test the true meaning of love, forgiveness, and redemption. What none of them knew was that fate had one last surprise in store, a revelation that would change everything they thought they knew about themselves and about each other. A truth that would force them to question everything they took for granted, and that would lead them to redefine the meaning of family, love, and loyalty. St. Joseph's Hospital bustled with activity when Brittany and Kevin burst through the emergency room doors. With their hearts pounding, they approached the information desk. We're looking for Linda Taylor, Kevin said, panting. We're her children. The nurse quickly typed on her computer. Room 305, third floor, she responded. But I must warn you, her condition is critical. As they rode up in the elevator, Brittany felt her world crumbling. Everything she had built, all the lies she had woven, seemed insignificant in the face of the possibility of losing her mother. Upon entering the room, the sight of Linda, pale and connected to multiple machines, hit Brittany like a punch to the stomach. She approached the bed trembling, taking her mother's cold hand in hers. "Mom," she whispered, tears freely running down her cheeks. "I'm here. I'm so sorry." To the surprise of both siblings, Linda slowly opened her eyes. A weak smile formed on her lips upon seeing her children. "My babies," she said in a barely audible voice, "I knew you'd come." Brittany, overwhelmed by guilt and remorse, began to speak hurriedly. "Mom, I've made so many mistakes, I've hurt so many people, I don't know how to fix it." Linda weakly squeezed her daughter's hand. "It's never too late to do the right thing, my love. True courage lies in recognizing our mistakes and trying to make amends." Those words struck deep within Brittany. For the first time in a long time, she felt the mask she had been wearing crumble completely, revealing the scared and lost woman underneath. Meanwhile, at the Anderson mansion, Michael struggled to process everything he had discovered. Sitting in his father's study, he stared blankly at the photographs and documents scattered across the desk. Each image, each piece of evidence of Brittany's deception, was like a dagger in his heart. Richard watched his son with a mixture of concern and guilt. Had he done the right thing by exposing the truth so brutally? "Son," he began, approaching Michael. "I know this is difficult to assimilate, but—" Michael raised his hand, interrupting his father. "No, Dad, don't try to justify it. I need time to think." At that moment, Sarah entered the study hurriedly. "Mr. Anderson, you have an urgent call. It's from St. Joseph's Hospital." Richard frowned, confused. "The hospital? What's this about?" Sarah lowered her voice. "It's about Linda Taylor, Brittany's mother. Apparently you're listed as her emergency contact." This revelation fell like a bomb in the room. Michael looked at his father, bewildered. "Dad, what's going on?" Richard, visibly disturbed, took the phone with trembling hands. After a brief conversation, he hung up and turned to his son, guilt etched in every line of his face. "Michael, there's something I need to confess, something I've kept secret for many years." At the hospital, Brittany and Kevin remained by their mother's bedside. Linda, gathering her last strength, spoke. "My children, there's something you need to know, something I've kept in my heart for too long." Brittany and Kevin leaned in to listen, not imagining how their mother's next words would change their lives forever. "Brittany," Linda said, her voice barely a whisper, "your father, your real father, is Richard Anderson." The shock of this revelation shook Brittany to her core. Suddenly, fragments of memories began to fit together. The strange looks from Richard, his interest in her even before she met Michael, the inexplicable feeling of familiarity she had felt upon first entering the Anderson mansion. But how? Brittany managed to articulate, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. Linda, with tears in her eyes, began to tell a story of forbidden love, difficult decisions, and sacrifices. She spoke of how she had worked as a maid in the Anderson mansion over 25 years ago, how she had fallen in love with the young and charismatic Richard, and how upon discovering her pregnancy, she had decided to leave to avoid complicating the life of the man she loved. "I never wanted you to know," Linda said, her voice weakening. "I wanted to protect you, give you a normal life. But now I see that my silence has only caused more pain." Brittany, overwhelmed by this revelation, felt her world spinning. Everything she thought she knew about herself, about her life, was crumbling, and with horror she realized the magnitude of what she had been about to do. Not only had she tried to con the Anderson family, but she had been about to marry her own half-brother. At the Anderson mansion, Richard was finishing telling his version of the story to a stunned Michael. "Son, I'm so sorry," Richard said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I never meant to hurt anyone. When I found out Brittany was my daughter, I tried to approach her, to get to know her, but things got complicated. when you two fell in love. Michael, struggling to assimilate this new reality, stood up from his chair. All this time, Brittany is my sister, and you knew it? Richard nodded, unable to look his son in the eye. I tried to separate you without revealing the truth. I thought that if I exposed Brittany's plan, you would naturally distance yourself from her. I never imagined things would go this far. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice laden with conflicting emotions. I need to see her, we need to talk. At the hospital, Brittany struggled with her own emotions, the hatred she had felt towards Richard, the guilt for her actions, the confused love she felt for Michael. It all mixed in a chaotic whirlwind in her mind. Mom, she said, squeezing Linda's hand, what should I do now? Linda, with the little strength she had left, looked at her daughter with love. The truth, my child, the truth is always the only path to redemption. At that moment, the door to the room opened. Richard and Michael entered, their faces a mixture of emotions, pain, confusion, remorse, and above all, a desperate need for answers. The five looked at each other in silence, each carrying the weight of their own secrets and lies. But amidst that emotional chaos, something began to emerge. The possibility of forgiveness, of understanding, of a new beginning. Linda, feeling her time running out, spoke with a weak but clear voice. It's time for the truth to come to light. It's time to heal the wounds of the past and build a future based on love and honesty. And so in that small hospital room, surrounded by the constant beeping of machines, a conversation began that would change their lives forever. Long-held secrets came to light, tears were shed, forgiveness was offered and accepted. Brittany, looking at Richard and Michael, felt that a part of her that had always been incomplete was finally finding its place. She was no longer the con artist, the liar, the woman desperate to escape her past. She was a daughter, a sister, a woman with the opportunity to redeem herself and start a new. Michael, for his part, struggled with conflicting emotions. The love he had felt for Brittany was transforming, becoming something different but equally profound. She was no longer the woman he dreamed of marrying, but the sister he never knew he had. Richard, facing the consequences of his past decisions, saw an opportunity to make amends for his mistakes. He looked at Linda, the woman he had never stopped loving, and at his 2 children, the fruits of that forbidden love. As the sun set outside the hospital window, bathing the room in a golden light, the Andersons and the Taylors began to glimpse a future different from what they had imagined, but full of possibilities of love, forgiveness, and redemption. Linda, with a serene smile on her face, closed her eyes for the last time, knowing she had fulfilled her last wish, to unite her family. And so, amidst the pain and loss, hope for a new beginning was born, a beginning based on truth, love, and mutual acceptance. Brittany, taking the hands of Richard and Michael, spoke with a trembling but determined voice. I can't change the past, but I can promise you a future of honesty and love. If you give me the chance, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of being an Anderson. Richard and Michael, with tears in their eyes, nodded. At that moment, they knew that, although the road would be difficult, they would walk it together, as the family they always should have been. As they left the hospital, the night sky lit up with a flash of shooting stars. Brittany, remembering an old superstition her mother used to tell her, closed her eyes and made a wish, the strength to be better, to love unconditionally and to live with the truth as her guide. And so, under the starry mantle of the night, the Anderson-Taylor family took their first steps towards an uncertain future, but one full of promises, united by bonds stronger than blood, the bonds of forgiveness, understanding, and true love.